war in Syria intensifies. The White House is reportedly days away on aiding rebels in their battle against government troops.
In Syria, hundreds more dead, many of them children.
الله أكبر.
حرب دمرت سوريا على مدى 5 سنوات تقريبا. المدنيون محاصرون الآن بين قوات النظام وداعش. وأثناء ضرب طائرات الحرب الأمريكية لإحدى الجماعات الإرهابية، بدأت جماعة أخرى تعرف باسم الواي تلوح في الأفق.
A US-led bombing campaign launched in September helped tip the balance in favor of the Kurds, who were also aided by 150 Iraqi Peshmerga fighters.
في مطلع عام 2015 أجبرت الضربات الجوية الأمريكية داعش على الخروج من مدينة كوباني. وبمساعدة البنتاغون استولت قوات الواي على زمام الأمور.
This is the 5th major bombing in Turkey in the past 8 months.
Turkey has spent much of this year reeling from a series of terror attacks.
The very scene Turkey had feared. Foreigners among the dead and injured from a blast at the country's most popular tourist hub.
Kurdish military group PKK has claimed responsibility for the attack.
YPG هي الفرع السوري من PKK المسؤول عن عقود من الهجمات الإرهابية على الدولة التركية، وقد اكتسبت الآن موطئ قدم على عتبة باب تركيا.
The solution of only helping the Syrian Kurds was short-sighted. It gained territory and it did defeat ISIS, which is a good thing, but it has actually laid the groundwork for more fighting in eastern Syria and more recruitment for the Islamic State.
اعتمد الرئيس الأمريكي باراك أوباما على الYPG قائلاً إنه غير مستعد بعد لإرسال قوات أمريكية إلى الجبهة السورية.
Having said that, I do not foresee a scenario in which boots on the ground in Syria, American boots on the ground in Syria, would not only be good for America, but also would be good for Syria.
One of the other things that a lot of people in the United States also enjoy about seeing the Kurds in action is it prevents a situation where the United States has to send in boots on the ground to fight house to house, town to town, to retake areas of Syria and Iraq taken by Daesh and jihadists.
لكن يبدو أن الولايات المتحدة لديها بالفعل قوات في سوريا. السؤال الوحيد هو منذ متى؟
That only happened later in time. The 2000 U.S. forces that came to Syria were not there at the beginning. It happened over time as the tasks that were being taken up by the Kurds grew more complex.
U.S. Special Forces have been a part of our operations to defeat Daesh from the very beginning. We certainly would not talk specifically about dates of when our forces move and where they move to, but know this, these are America's finest warriors, and these warriors have been part of our efforts to defeat Daesh from the very first day.
Washington is preparing to send more troops to help the fight against Islamic State. This in a clear departure from previous policy voiced by the American president numerous times in the past.
تم إخفاء هذه المعلومة ليس عن عامة الشعب فحسب، بل عن الكونغرس الأمريكي أيضاً.
This is a major trend that's been going on for quite some time that is very disturbing to a lot of people, including myself, who read the U.S. Constitution, which says that it's the Congress that has the power to declare war, even though the President is the Commander-in-Chief.
سبب تواجد القوات الأمريكية الخاصة في سوريا هو تسليح وتدريب الواي بي جي ضد داعش بشكل سري.
Well, that's right. These forces, they operate in silence. These are very special soldiers who are extraordinarily well trained and who have amazing capabilities. But part of their capabilities are because they operate in the shadows. They operate in darkness. They operate where others will not operate. And they bring their very presence strikes fear into the heart of our enemy. And this is what we wanted. We wanted al-Baghdadi to go to sleep and keep one of his eyes open, although I think he lost one eye. So keep his one good eye open. We want them to live in fear.
The shock accusation came after U.S. elite troops were spotted in Syria wearing the insignia of Kurdish fighters whom Ankara calls terrorists. The troops were equipped with low-profile helmets as well as MK-47 automatic grenade launchers, both typically used by U.S. Special Forces.
تجدد اشتعال الجدل المحيط باحتمال دعم واشنطن لجماعة إرهابية بعد نشر وكالة أنباء سورية لصور تظهر جنوداً أمريكيين يرتدون شارات الواي بي جي.
They did make a mistake, and it created some hard times for me as a spokesman.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and apologies for the delay.
I think the first thing to make clear is that wearing those YPG patches was unauthorized and it was inappropriate. And corrective action has been taken. And we have communicated as much to our military partners and our military allies in the region. Our focus is to provide advice and assistance to the Syrian Democratic Forces, particularly the Syrian Arab component of that force. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next week. Take care. We're not there to worry about who's wearing what clothes. We're there to worry about defeating Daesh to kill terrorists, and that's what those Marines were doing.
رغم تلقي الواي بي جي للدعم الأمريكي الجوي والبري، تنمو داعش لتصبح تهديداً عالمياً.
Just chaired a meeting of the government's emergency committee, and I want to update you with the latest information about the attack.
The sequence of events started with a hired white van driving at speed across London Bridge.
Londoners will never be cowed by terrorism.
We don't know if this attack was directed by Al-Qaeda or the ISIS terrorist group, but tonight Clarissa Ward tells us that both had put a bullseye on France.
The third major attack that ISIS has claimed responsibility for in just the last couple of weeks.
And the French President Hollande this morning declaring war on ISIS.
This country and the world now reacts to another series of deadly terror attacks. Tonight, the urgent manhunt right now after the city of Brussels is rocked with multiple explosions at the airport and then in the subway. Americans among the injured, among those trapped, and you'll hear from them tonight.
Stay down. Stay down. For the latest on that deadly New Year's Eve terror attack in Turkey.
Minutes into the new year, at least one gunman is said to have shot a police officer and a civilian before heading into the packed Raina nightclub and opening fire.
في آخر يوم من سبتمبر عام 2015 تأخذ الحرب منعطفاً دراماتيكياً آخر. تنضم روسيا إلى الحرب بشكل رسمي لصالح النظام.
Syrian state television announced that Russia had commenced airstrikes in the country. President Bashar al-Assad confirmed he'd requested military assistance from Russia.
President Obama said today Russia's entry into the Syrian war is a recipe for disaster.
The tension between the West and Russia now carries over into Syria.
He doesn't distinguish between ISIL and a moderate Sunni opposition that wants to see Mr. Assad go. From their perspective, they're all terrorists. And that's a recipe for disaster. And it's one that I reject.
At a White House news conference, the president also said he'd be willing to negotiate with Russia and Iran about Syria as long as it involved Assad's exit.
Russia, which is now the major outside player in Syria, along with Iran, has an interest that may be summed up in 3 words, and that's keep America out.
It was very clear after the Russians intervened in 2015 and the Americans did not respond with their own escalation that little by little Assad's forces were recapturing territory.
قلبت القوات العسكرية الروسية موازين المعركة لصالح بشار الأسد، حيث انتزع النظام السوري كافة المدن الكبيرة من الثوار، بما في ذلك مدينة درعا مهد الثورة السورية.
It's been a game-changing couple of weeks in international relations over Syria, with Russia escalating its role in the civil war.
انذار الأسد الأخير، الاستسلام أو الجوع. تقوم الحافلات المدرسية بإجلاء المدنيين من المناطق التي سيطر عليها النظام. تنشغل الآن القوى العالمية العظمى بداعش وتساعد حليفهم الجديد.
The Syrian government's ruthless push to take back Aleppo. President Bashar al-Assad's troops now control most of the old city, relying heavily on Russian military muscles. This is an estimated 200,000 civilians are trapped inside the shrinking rebel-held portion of the city.
بينما تحشد داعش الأجانب من كافة أنحاء العالم للمحاربة من أجل قضيتها، كذلك تفعل الواي بي جي. كل ذلك بفضل حملة العلاقات العامة الضخمة بمساعدة الولايات المتحدة.
It's very good to be here again. I'm very pleased to be here. We of course work very closely with the Syrian Democratic Forces. When they are fighting Daesh, we do provide air support. It has to be coordinated. And so that will obviously continue as they begin this movement south against Daesh positions north of Raqqa.
في تلك الأثناء تمت تسمية الواي بي جي باسم جديد، وأصبحت SDF هي الحاكمة الجديدة شمال سوريا. المتحدث الرسمي باسمها آنذاك هو طلال سلو.
ما أتوقع كان في معركة حقيقية. أغلب المعارك اللي كنا نشوفها نحن نشوفها بشكل يعني نظري. عمليا على الأرض ما كان فيها المعارك، علما أن كان في سقوط لعدد من القتلى الشهداء، لكن هذا كان يتم عبر ألغام. كل المعارك نسبة القتلى لقوات سوريا الديمقراطية 10% خلال ما يسمى معارك بعيدة، يعني معارك مباشرة ما بين الطرفين ما كنا نشوف نهائيا. الواي بي جي وحدات حماية المرأة كان الهدف من وجودهم هو إظهار للرأي العام العالمي أن المقاتلات هم من يقوموا بالتصدي لهذا الإرهاب المتمثل بتنظيم داعش الإرهابي، وهذا لقى قبول خاصة في أوروبا. الغاية منه كان هو عبارة عن موقف دعائي، خاصة ما رأينا في حملة مدينة الرقة. يعني حملة مدينة الرقة اجوا أعلنوا أن الرقة هي عاصمة الإرهاب، عاصمة تنظيم داعش الإرهابي. يجب أن نظهر للرأي العام العالمي أن من يقوم بهذه الحملة للقضاء عليهم هي المرأة، خاصة المرأة الكردية.
One shot, one bullet, one kill. An American man with ISIS in the crosshairs. The American sniper, known locally as Christian.
My name is Kevin Howard. I'm 29 years old. I was born in San Francisco, California. And I looked into a program with the YPG called the Lions of Rojava.
On American citizens, civilians fighting the Islamic State group. Many are former U.S. military, but some have never seen a battle before.
I went to Syria because I was lost in my own life. I might not have the combat experience, or I might not have the soldiering experience, but maybe this is something that I can try to do. If nobody else is going to do it, then why not me? What's to prevent me from giving it a go?
تنتشر على شبكة الإنترنت حملة علاقات عامة لجذب الناس إلى الواي بي جي، وتساعد شبكة سرية المتطوعين للوصول إلى العراق وسوريا.
We got smuggled into Syria. They used Peshmerga drivers and Peshmerga vehicles, and then they dressed us up like Peshmerga soldiers, and that's how we got smuggled across the border.
It was a very arduous journey, full of much hardship and danger. There was much bribery involved, there was much trickery involved.
The YPG itself runs its operations like a totalitarian government. They run their region like a totalitarian government. This is not a pro-democracy movement, and I imagine that the volunteers discovered this pretty quickly after they arrived.
يصل 3 جنود أمريكيون إلى سوريا للانضمام إلى ما اعتقدوا أنه القتال ضد داعش، لكن في البداية عليهم الذهاب إلى أكاديمية تتضمن أكثر من مجرد التدريب على الأسلحة.
There was just a little too much ideological bent in the training. The YPG seemed to me to be taking their cues from the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany when it came to close order drill, and it made me kind of uncomfortable.
The YPG is putting its own people in newly liberated areas, accusing it of ethnic cleansing. Amnesty accuses the Kurdish People's Protection Units of razing entire villages. The YPG is a key ally of the US-led international coalition.
رأى الرجال بالفعل ما يكفي لمعرفة أن محاربة داعش ليست الهدف الوحيد.
In Azawi, they started bulldozing all the buildings. And when I asked them, I said, what the hell are you doing, you know? And they said, well, it's tactical. It's a tactical thing. And I said, well, that's a pretty poor excuse. I mean, tactical. You're not bulldozing the buildings that we live in this village.
A Syrian Kurdish militia has driven out thousands of non-Kurdish civilians from areas they've captured from ISIL militants. That's the accusation from the rights watchdog Amnesty International, which says the actions amount to war crimes.
They just didn't even bother to comment on it. So that gave me reason to want to do a much more complete investigation. Here's what I found. The YPG in any number of cases had emptied out towns, and this is from the Amnesty report, of their Sunni population by force. They made some excuse. They said they were under attack or something. They would go into a town and demand that people leave at gunpoint.
This attack with these 16-year-old soldiers, they call themselves guerrillas, fired upon a car fleeing Manbij, and somebody fell out of the car, even though these two children and a mom and a father got out of the car and put their hands in the air. But yeah, even though somebody fell out of the car and rolled into the ditch, and then the car backed up and they kept firing. So maybe these two men that were walking down the road in Azawi just got shot for no apparent reason. They were obviously unarmed. Maybe that's just the chaos of war. Maybe it was Daesh putting recon out, trying to test our response. Maybe these guys volunteered knowing they would die. Maybe it was just two old men on the other side of the village going for a walk. I don't know. I don't have these answers.
They're not intent on living by the rules of warfare, which is to protect civilians rather. No, for them, civilians are the target, and they're perfectly happy to do it.
The Syrian National Coalition, the main political opposition in exile, is accusing the YPG of what it calls violations against ethnic Arabs. It is now demanding the United Nations sends an investigation mission to the area. The Kurdish force has depopulated and razed Arab villages in Hasaki province.
While I was in Syria, I did not meet with a single Arab, to my knowledge. It's weird because I was in Syria. I was in the Kurd part of Syria, so I met with Swedes, Canadians, Czechs, Poles, and one Chinaman, but I did not meet any Arabs.
Dozens of civilians were wounded in the ongoing assaults carried by Syrian Democratic Forces. Dozens of families were forced to flee their villages.
So the YPG's agenda and their list, basically, of places to attack and to rid of their Sunni inhabitants turned out to be coincident with the Syrian regime's own list of enemies. The people directing the cleansing of northern Syria by the YPG were the Assad regime. Did the American government know that? Were the Americans aware of it? Probably not.
I mean, one of the things that in our discussions with the YPG that we always insisted on, and was always a concern, was that there are ethnic tensions in northeast Syria, and we would always try to press the Kurds to be as inclusive, as non-discriminatory. So that was always a concern, and there's no doubt that the modes of governance of the Kurds have not been sort of models of transparency, inclusiveness, etc.
ظهرت أيضا تقارير عن انتهاكات لحقوق الإنسان من قبل الواي بي جي تتضمن حرمان السوريين غير الأكراد من الخدمات الطبية، وهو أمر يقول باتريك إنه شاهده أثناء عمله في الوحدة الطبية للواي بي جي.
There was a particular haval in the Kobani Health Committee that said that we weren't to treat Arabs to the same degree as we treat Kurdish people, as we treat Kurdish soldiers. There was no way in hell that we were going to follow an order that said that we couldn't treat any person equally, that we couldn't treat Arab civilians from the majority Arab city that we were liberating equally.
تصاعد الخلاف في أغسطس عام 2017 بعد إصابة رقيب في مشاة البحرية الأمريكية على يد عضو في الواي بي جي، وتستر البنتاغون عما حدث.
Why did that incident happen? It happened because the Syrian Kurdish fighters were angry that the American soldiers were giving medical help to a group of wounded Syrian Arabs.
At least 3 Americans died in July fighting ISIS in Syria, but they weren't fighting with American military units.
A 24-year-old British man who went to Syria to fight the so-called Islamic State group has been killed. More than 400 foreigners are fighting alongside the Kurds, and a handful of them are Americans.
المقاتلين الأجانب كانوا يطلق عليهم اسم المقاتلين الأمميين، ولكن لم يكونوا يتواجدوا بشكل دائم ضمن أماكن تواجد قوات سوريا الديمقراطية، وإنما فقط عند أي حملة كانوا يأتوا بهم يشاركوا بالحملة ولو بشكل رمزي لإيحاء الرأي العام، خاصة يعني نحن كنا نشوف كان في قتلى يسقطوا منهم من عدة دول، على الأساس كانوا عندما يوصلوا بتلك المناطق من باب البروباغندا، من باب الدعاية الإعلامية أن في مقاتلين أمميين عم بيجوا بيضحوا بأرواحهم لنصرة هذه القضية العادلة حسب ما هن يدعون اللي هن الحزب العمال الكردستاني.
In the interest of truth, I will say this. There is a business of having martyrs for your cause. The more people that die for your cause, the more valid your cause looks like, especially foreign volunteers. For example, if you have 5 or 6 or 10 dead German volunteers, the German government will look at your cause and say, wow, maybe we should give money to this. Maybe we should throw air support. Maybe we should give you tanks, weapons, armament. I know for a fact there has been many foreign volunteers who have been pushed towards this outcome and died that did not want to. I changed. How could you not? When I see a young soldier, 15, 14 years old, joining the Kurdish movement, the Westerner in me says, that's disgusting. He's a child. How could he be a soldier?
The UN says a majority of the child soldiers in Syria have been recruited by the YPG terror group, which is backed by the US.
To know that kids thought there was value in ending up on a yellow poster, so more kids would join up and end up on yellow posters in this really vicious, reciprocating cycle of violence and death. Yeah, I'm a little mad at the idea that maybe lives are not worth as much as propaganda.
When you become as evil as the enemy that you are trying to fight, you are no better than them. That use suicide bombing, that use horrible tactics against Turkish people, against Turkish civilians. This does nothing. This is nothing for the cause. This is nothing for the revolution. This is nothing for Kurdish rights.
في الحلقة الأخيرة من سوريا خيوط الظلام، تغيير السلطة في البيت الأبيض وكذلك في شمال سوريا بالتزامن مع سيطرة الواي بي جي على المنطقة وما يكمن وراء ذلك.